to the video on fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. So this figure shows where the body is in the water. You can see 65% of the body water is found inside cells, and we call it intracellular fluid, or ICF for short. And then the remaining 35% is found in the extracellular fluid, or ECF for short. So that's made up of interstitial fluid, which is in between the cells, plasma in the blood, lymph in the lymphatic system, and then transcellular fluid just in between cells. So fluid moves in or out of cells basically due to osmosis. So we can see here water moves out of cells when concentration of electrolytes in tissue fluid rises, and water moves into cells when concentration of electrolytes in tissue fluid falls. So when you just drink a glass of pure water, the osmolarity would fall and water would move into cells. If you eat a bunch of potato chips, your osmolarity would rise and water would move out of cells to balance out the osmolarity. Alright, so what determines the amount and direction of fluid that flows between body compartments? And the correct answer is B, the concentration of solutes. That's whatever is dissolved in the water. Alright, this figure shows how we get our water. So most fluid intake is due to eating and drinking, and a little bit from metabolism. Water is lost through urine is the main way, also through skin, from sweating, also from breathing. There's water in your breath, that's why you see your breath on a cold day, and through feces. So water loss varies with activity and temperature, and to maintain balance, the body uses mechanisms to adjust intake and output. It's important to keep our water balanced because it has big effects on blood pressure. So when the body's total volume of water declines, physical changes are going to stimulate so first, when the body's total volume of water declines, blood pressure is going to decrease, the sodium concentration is going to increase, and osmolarity is going to increase. So in response to this, the thirst center in the hypothalamus is stimulated. That's going to cause you to drink. That increases your water volume. At the same time, physical changes are going to stimulate the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus stimulates the posterior pituitary to release ADH, antidiuretic hormone. ADH prompts the collecting ducts of the kidneys to reabsorb more water and produce less urine. Decreasing fluid loss will help bring total body water back to normal. So that's the two basic ways that's how we respond when the body's total volume of water declines. We get thirsty and we drink, and then we reabsorb more water and produce less urine, and that will get our water level back to normal, back to homeostasis. So what effect does antidiuretic hormone have on the body? And the correct answer is D. It prompts the kidneys to reabsorb more water. Alright, we need to tell how the hypothalamus responds to increased blood volume and blood pressure. So in response to this, the hypothalamus inhibits the release of ADH. This causes the renal tubules to reabsorb less water, leading to increased urine output and a decline in total body water. So ADH is one of the main hormones affecting our fluid balance. Alright, disorders of water balance can result from an abnormality in either fluid volume, fluid concentration, or distribution of fluid between compartments. So we need to know about a couple of those. Volume depletion could result from blood loss or the loss of both water and sodium. And then dehydration results when the body eliminates more water than sodium. One way to check for dehydration is to pinch people. So as the tissue loses fluid, it loses elasticity. So a test to evaluate hydration is to gently pinch the skin on the back of the hand, the lower arm, or the abdomen. Normally the skin just springs back to normal. If the skin remains peaked, it's a sign of dehydration, and it's called tenting. And so it will go back to normal, but it takes longer if you're dehydrated. Alright, next we need to talk about how water lost through sweat affects the fluid inside your cells. So this figure shows as water is lost through sweat, that water comes from the blood. And when the blood loses water, then fluid shifts from the tissues into the blood. And when the tissues lose water, then fluid shifts from the cells into the tissues. So it eventually, that water loss through sweat causes water to be lost through the cells. Alright, next we need to talk about fluid excess. Not a very common problem, but it could be caused by renal failure. One specific type is water intoxication. So this can occur if someone consumes an excessive amount of water, or if someone replaces heavy losses of water and sodium with just water. So if you're running a marathon, you want to drink not just water, or if you're in the desert, you get water plus you get salt tablets. Because if you drink just water, it causes the amount of sodium in the extracellular fluid to drop, and that can cause water to move into the cells, and that causes the cells to swell. If this happens in your lungs or in your brain, it can kill you. There was an interesting story of they did a radio contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii back when the Nintendo Wii was new. So these people had to drink gallons of water and see who could hold their pee the longest, and whoever won got a Wii, this cool video game system. And it ended up killing someone because of this. Her brain swelled up and she died. So whoever came up with that radio idea got fired. Okay, next, fluid accumulation involves accumulation of fluid between compartments. This can be caused by electrolyte imbalances, increased capillary pressure, and decreased concentration of plasma proteins. So the primary symptom is edema, a fluid accumulation in the interstitial spaces causing tissue swelling. So what condition results when the body eliminates more water than sodium? And the correct answer is dehydration. Alright, next we're going to talk about electrolyte balance. So electrolytes are crucial for proper body functioning. The major cations, positive ions, are sodium, potassium, calcium, hydrogen, and the major anions are chloride, bicarbonate, and phosphate. So 3 functions of electrolytes: they drive chemical reactions, they affect the distribution of the body's water content, and they help determine a cell's electrical potential, which determines its resting membrane potential and its ability to send action potentials. I forgot to say that electrolytes, number 12, electrolytes are substances that break up into electrically charged particles called ions when dissolved in water. So that's the definition of an electrolyte. It breaks up into ions when you put it in water. And then the 3 functions were driving chemical reactions, affecting the distribution of the body's water content, and determining a cell's electrical potential. The main electrolyte in extracellular fluid is sodium. So it determines the volume of total body water, influences how body water is distributed, and plays a key role in depolarization. Remember, it was sodium ions that are responsible for action potentials. And so it's regulated very tightly. So when the serum, that's the blood levels of sodium, are low, aldosterone is going to be released. Aldosterone prompts renal tubules to reabsorb sodium. Also, ADH release is suppressed. This causes the kidneys to secrete more water, and together these two actions cause the sodium levels to normalize. If the sodium levels get too high, ADH causes the kidneys to reabsorb water. ADH stimulates thirst, and the increased renal absorption of water combined with increased water intake causes these sodium levels to normalize. So if sodium does get out of balance, it's not a good thing. You don't need to have the values memorized, but hypernatremia is a plasma concentration greater than 145, and it indicates a fluid deficit. Usually self-corrects by triggering thirst, so once you drink more, you're good again. Hyponatremia is a plasma concentration of sodium of less than 135. This can result from excess body water, usually corrected by excretion of excess water. So basically you pee more and you're okay. So your body is constantly regulating these levels and keeping them in homeostasis. The main cation of intracellular fluid is potassium. It works hand in hand with sodium. It's crucial for proper nerve and muscle function. Again, we need potassium for action potentials. So we're going to look at some potassium imbalances. So first, hyperkalemia is too much potassium. It can develop after a crush injury or a severe burn, or it can occur gradually from the use of potassium-sparing diuretics or renal insufficiency. It makes nerve and muscle cells irritable, and it's actually what's in a lethal injection. It says here at the bottom, imbalances can cause life-threatening cardiac arrhythmias. So if your potassium balance is off, you can't generate action potentials in your heart cells, and your heart stops beating and you die. So one of the things in a lethal injection is a very high dose of potassium, which makes your heart stop. Next you have hypokalemia. So this is when your potassium levels get too low. It could result from diuretics, from vomiting, or chronic diarrhea, and it makes the cells less excitable. So again, it's hard to generate action potentials, and that leads to problems if you can't generate action potentials in your heart. Alright, next ion we're going to talk about is calcium. So some of the functions: it strengthens bones. That would be the first function. It also plays a key role in muscle contraction, which we learned about before, also nerve transmission, and also blood clotting. So we didn't go into detail with the blood clotting, with all the clotting factors, but calcium is necessary for that process as well. And the plasma levels of this are regulated by parathyroid hormone. So let's look at some calcium imbalances next. So hypercalcemia is too much. Could result from hyperparathyroidism. So if your parathyroid is making too much hormone, you'll get too much calcium in your blood. Also, it can come from hypothyroidism, so not enough thyroid hormone being released, or from alkalosis, and it's going to inhibit depolarization, so make it harder to send action potentials. That can cause all kinds of problems. Then hypocalcemia is not enough calcium. This could result from hypoparathyroidism, so not enough parathyroid hormone, or hyperthyroidism, too much thyroid hormone. Could result from acidosis or from diarrhea, and it increases the excitation of nerves and muscles, so you could make action potentials happening when you don't want them to, leading to muscle spasms, and that's not good. So that's calcium. What's the main cation of the extracellular fluid? And the correct answer is sodium. Next, we're going to talk about acid-base balance. So this has a big influence on homeostasis. The pH of blood ranges from 7.35 to 7.45, and even slight deviations from this can be fatal. 3 reasons it's important to maintain pH balance. Enzymes are sensitive to pH, so they only work at certain pHs, and if they're not at that pH, they're not going to work well. Electrolyte activity is influenced by pH, so that will influence, our water balance and action potentials. Also, our hormone activity is influenced by pH. So, an acid, just to review from chapter 2, an acid is any chemical that releases hydrogen ions, and a base is any chemical that accepts hydrogen ion. And from the body at work, the pH of blood and tissue fluid ranges from 7.35 to 7.45, so about 7.4. But again, it's going to vary throughout the day depending on what you eat or how you're breathing. So next we need to know the function of a buffer. Buffers resist changes in pH to keep acid-base balance in homeostasis. And next we're going to talk about the body's buffering systems. So the chemical buffers include bicarbonate, phosphate, and protein buffer systems. And these all use a weak base to bind hydrogen ions and a weak acid to release them. So if an acid is added, the weak base can bind to the excess hydrogen ions. If a base is added, the weak acid can release hydrogen ions to neutralize that base. So let's look at one of these. Bicarbonate buffer system is the main extracellular buffer system. So we can see here, when carbon dioxide combines with water, it forms carbonic acid, which is a weak acid. It dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, and that lowers the pH. If more hydrogen ions are added to the system, they'll react with bicarbonate to form carbonic acid, which then dissociates into carbon dioxide and water, and that raises the pH. So depending on, this is a reversible reaction, so depending on what's going on in the body, it can go either way. And that's the main extracellular buffer system. The main intracellular buffer system is potassium and the protein buffer system, and they work in a similar way. Alright, next we're going to talk about the physiological buffers. The respiratory and urinary systems also help to control pH and resist changes in pH. The lungs expel carbon dioxide to lower pH, and the kidneys expel hydrogen ions to lower pH. So this is how the respiratory system would regulate the pH if CO2 begins to accumulate in the bloodstream. First, there are chemoreceptors in the brainstem that detect this fall in pH, which that's what happens when the carbon dioxide levels get too high. Next, the central chemoreceptors signal the respiratory centers to increase the rate and depth of breathing, resulting in the expulsion of more carbon dioxide. So this lowers the carbon dioxide levels, and then the concentration of hydrogen ions falls and the pH rises back to normal. So if you want to see that in words, central chemoreceptors in the brainstem detect a decline in pH from an accumulation of carbon dioxide. They signal the respiratory centers to increase the rate and depth of breathing, and the lungs blow off CO2. So as we're breathing more, we're getting rid of more carbon dioxide. Then less carbon dioxide is available to combine with water to form carbonic carbonic acid, so the concentration of hydrogen ions decreases and the pH rises back to normal. So we need to know how long it takes for the chemical, respiratory, and renal buffers to begin working. So the chemical buffers work instantaneously and prevent most changes in pH from getting too bad. If the pH is out of balance for more than a minute or two, the respiratory system will notice this and start to react. The renal system takes the longest. It takes about 24 hours to begin working, but it also has the most capacity, meaning it can get rid of as much acid or base as it needs to. So next, let's look at how the kidneys get rid of hydrogen ions. So first, carbon dioxide leaves the blood and enters into cells along the distal kidney tubules. So that's what's happening right here. Carbon dioxide entering the kidney tubules. In these cells, carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid. Then that carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Then the hydrogen ions diffuse out of the cell, and there's a sodium hydrogen cotransporter that's working there, so as the hydrogen leaves, sodium comes in and it binds with that bicarbonate ion, and then that sodium bicarbonate is absorbed into the blood. So the end result is that hydrogen ions are excreted into the urine, making the urine acidic, and the sodium bicarbonate then is in the blood, and both of those help to raise the plasma pH. So let's watch this animation on this.
When carbon dioxide increases, so does the concentration of hydrogen ions. This causes the body's pH to decline. The renal system works to expel hydrogen ions from the body, while also reabsorbing bicarbonate. This makes the renal system the most powerful of all the buffer systems. Carbon dioxide leaves the blood and enters cells along the distal kidney tubules. In these cells, carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid, that is, H2CO3. The carbonic acid immediately dissociates to yield hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. The hydrogen ions diffuse out of the cell and into the tubular fluid, where they displace sodium. The displaced sodium diffuses into the tubular cell, where it combines with the bicarbonate to form sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate is then reabsorbed into the blood. The end result is that hydrogen ions are excreted into the urine, making the urine acidic, whereas sodium bicarbonate is reabsorbed into the blood. Both actions help increase plasma pH.
Alright, so again, the kidneys expel hydrogen ions and reabsorb bicarbonate. That's our most powerful buffer system because we can get rid of basically however much hydrogen ions we want. Doesn't really matter how acidic our urine is. It's also the slowest to respond, though. Again, it takes about 24 hours to respond. So when the body's pH falls below normal, which reaction would occur first? And first we're going to have a chemical buffer system, so hydrogen would bind with bicarbonate. Alright, next we're going to talk about some acid-base imbalances. Respiratory imbalances result from an excess or deficiency of carbon dioxide, and metabolic imbalances result from an excess or a deficiency of bicarbonate. So let's look first at respiratory acidosis. So that's too much acid. So this is caused by retention of carbon dioxide. So if you're not breathing enough, such as from emphysema, pneumonia, or apnea, then your carbon dioxide levels get too high, and that leads to acidosis. Then respiratory alkalosis is kind of the opposite. It's caused by hyperventilation, so if you're breathing too fast, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide, and we don't want to get rid of too much carbon dioxide. That will make the pH become high, or alkalosis. Then next we need to know the cause of metabolic acidosis. So there could be several causes of this. One is increased production of acids, such as ketone bodies in diabetes mellitus or lactic acid in anaerobic metabolism. Could be caused by consumption of acidic drugs like aspirin. Could be caused by the inability of the kidneys to excrete hydrogen ions, such as in renal insufficiency. Or it could be from the loss of bicarbonate, such as from chronic diarrhea. Then metabolic alkalosis is less common. Could be caused by the loss of gastric juices, such as through vomiting, or through excessive ingestion of bicarbonate, such as antacids. So if you have heartburn, sometimes people take too much antacids, and then that can lead to metabolic alkalosis, which causes other problems. But luckily our body has all these buffer systems, and they can compensate for the others. So we're going to look at compensation for acid-base imbalances first, how the respiratory system compensates for a low pH. So the respiratory system responds to metabolic disturbances by adjusting ventilation, either increasing or decreasing the respiratory rate. So if the pH is low, respiratory rate will increase. We'll get rid of more carbon dioxide, and that will bring the pH up. If the pH is high, the respiratory rate decreases. That causes us to slow down our breathing, and it raises the carbon dioxide levels and gets the pH down back to normal. And then how the renal system compensates for a low pH, it adjusts the rate of hydrogen ion excretion. So if the pH is low, kidneys will eliminate hydrogen and reabsorb more bicarbonate and get the pH back up. If the pH is high, kidneys will conserve hydrogen and excrete more bicarbonate. So if our respiratory system is failing, such as from emphysema or something, and that's causing respiratory acidosis, then our kidneys will try to compensate for that by excreting more hydrogen ions and reabsorbing bicarbonate. So the respiratory and renal systems can compensate for each other and keep our pH in balance. Last question, which electrolyte disturbance would result from acidosis? And correct answer is hyperkalemia.